Welcome, everybody. My name is Adam Hanna, National Director of Philanthropic Engagement at Hazelden Betty Ford. It's my privilege to welcome you to Lunch on Everest. Glad you're here. And thank you for joining Ryan Rivard, Let's Fuel Growth, and Hazelden Betty Ford on this collaborative journey over the past few months. For those of you that don't know, Hazelden Betty Ford is the nation's leading nonprofit provider of comprehensive behavioral health care, leading the way in helping society rise above stigma and overcome addiction. Our story started 75 years ago in a farmhouse turned treatment center on 217 acres near Center City, Minnesota. And today, our legacy continues through the stories of hope, redemption, and healing that our patients and families share as a part of their own legacies. Today, we're here to celebrate stories, and not just Ryan's story, but really all of yours as well, because these shared experiences are what bring us together. So thank you again for coming together today with us. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Ryan Rivard. Ryan Rivard is an entrepreneur and marketing professional with over a decade of experience, and more recently, he's been using his story and platform to affect societal change, raising awareness and funds for mental health, youth recovery, and suicide prevention. And personally, I just have to say how much I've enjoyed getting to know Ryan over the past few months. He's really become a role model, an example for me and what I continue to define in my own recovery experience. So without further delay, Ryan, I'll let you take it from here. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it, Adam. Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for joining. Um, Really just wanted to first say thank you for everybody that was watching along the journey, and for all of the support and the prayers that you sent out. It certainly helped me along the way, and it was great to have everybody along for the ride. So hopefully it was an exciting experience for you. Um, so obviously, as we sit here together, I recently just returned about a week and a half ago from summiting Mount Everest, and I did so on May 20th. And it was certainly a very interesting and exciting and adventurous experience for me. Lots of different things mentally, physically that happened along the way. So I'd love to give you just kind of a brief oversight of the trip. I know that I posted kind of up until we had the summit push, and so then I was waiting to kind of put together some things so that we could share that together as a team. Um, but yeah, so for right now, um, when I left for this trip, I left on April 8th, and during that time, I flew out to to Doha, Qatar, and then from there I flew into Kathmandu. And so once I got to Kathmandu, I started to then meet some of the other people from the team that we were going to be joining along on the adventure. And people come from all over the world, of course, to do this trip. There's not too many Americans actually that do it. There's plenty of European, a lot of UK individuals that come out, and um, but yeah, so we spent some time getting to know each other over the next day, and then did a briefing with the team where we could meet some of the Sherpas, meet some of the guides. And then the following day, we left on a bus, and we drive through the mountains to a small airport called Lukla, a town called Lukla. And it's one of I believe it's the highest runway. The runway actually goes up when you land. So it does take quite a skilled pilot to land on the runway. Going out is certainly easier, but landing is a bit challenging. So once we flew into that airport, then really we kind of started our journey, our hike. And so you hike along a number of different towns as you go out to Everest, and it usually takes anywhere from 7 to 10 days, 12 days, typically, just depending on how quickly you hike through some of these towns. And as you go along the towns, when we get to certain checkpoints, for instance, one of the bigger towns is called Namche, and it's a large bazaar um, of different goods, and they fly in a lot of different souvenirs and supplies and these kind of things for people as they're going through the different mountains. And that's kind of the central hub then for a lot of the other mountains that are in the region. But as we go along these trails and we get to certain towns, sometimes what we'll do is we'll spend the rest of the afternoon doing some kind of acclimation hike. So as you're going up, you're getting higher and higher in altitude, of course, and so you do some of these acclimation hikes to climb up, some of the mountains on the side region, and really just kind of sit there for a little bit to allow your body to process everything that's going on. And then, of course, afterwards, then you come down and you sleep lower. So that helps your body kind of acclimate. But you make the journey out there, and you certainly start to notice the elevation. I've spent a lot of time in Colorado, a lot of time doing other mountains as well, but it's hard to not feel it right away, especially as you get past 14,000 feet in elevation. When you finally arrive to base camp is quite a large setting. It usually takes about an hour at least to walk from one end to the other end. And there are plenty of people that just do that kind of pilgrimage, that kind of journey. And there's definitely, like I said, different summits that you can pass along the way, different mountains. But there's a lot of tourism that goes out to base camp, and they might come and stay for a day and then leave. But for the rest of the people that are there to summit, there's usually two seasons. So one is during the time that I went, April and May, which is typically the best time to go just based on the weather. And then there is another time frame in September around that time. But yeah, so base camp in and of itself is 17,500 feet around there. So it's quite high in elevation, and a lot of people, as they go through it, start to get sick. They start to feel the altitude, and it starts to affect them negatively. And so unfortunately, they have to come down. Fortunately, nobody in our trek had that issue. We've all had quite a bit of experience. There were a couple people once we got to base camp that did get what is known as the Kumu cough, which is the ice fall that I have pictured behind me. And the air there is just so dry that a lot of people start to develop coughs, dry coughs. And the problem with that is that usually it doesn't go away until you start going down in altitude. And if it gets worse, sometimes people will start to develop coughs where they're coughing up blood and these kind of things. So it's always something to be watched. There were 418 permits, I believe, that were issued this year. And of that, 200 people of those did not make it past base camp. They got sick and had to go home. And I did speak with one of the doctors that was stationed there from Colorado, and he said that they were flying home people, 2 to 3 people a day from base camp. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things where, again, your body has to really adjust to the environment. But yeah, so the trip itself was 7 days, 5 days up. And for me personally, it took me 2 days to get back down. It's not that for everybody. Typically, it can be anywhere from 5 to 6 to 7 days up, just depending on how your body is feeling. And then what people tend to not realize is, and I know this seems silly maybe as I say it, but most people really just focus on the summit. And that is definitely a huge goal and a huge endeavor, but it's also halfway. And so the unfortunate thing is that a lot of people, because of that, start to really get sick, and more people end up dying actually on the way down than they do on the way up. And so similar for our team, we had about 17 people that were in the crew, 3 of which did not summit. Some didn't get past a couple of the first camps. And then of the people that did summit, there were about 7 or 8 that unfortunately had to get helicoptered out from Camp 2 on the way down due to a number of different things. one girl really started losing cognitive abilities at the higher camps and started getting frostbite. Ended up uh, not understanding where she was, and she ended up going to the hospital. Another gentleman went down um, from pulmonary edema, had about 50% blood oxygen levels. So it does get quite dangerous up there, as it's to be expected. But yeah, so as we go through the camps, we have to always pass what is known as the Kumbu Icefall. Again, the picture in the back. It is one of the most dangerous parts of the trip. Um, not just because you're going through crevasses and these kind of things, which you can certainly fall through, but because we're on a moving glacier, and moving in the sense that as the weather changes, especially as it starts to get warmer and warmer in the season, a lot of things shift and melt. And we're talking about entire shelves of ice that shift and melt. And so, unfortunately, even as people were setting up the ladders and ropes and these kind of things, some of them had an avalanche and unfortunately perished in that experience as well. So a lot of people kind of fear that first initial part of the trip. But if you're going from the Nepal side, it is unavoidable in terms of the experience. And so that is from base camp until Camp 1. And once you get to Camp 1, you're at about 21,000 feet, maybe a little less. And that camp, in rotations as we went through, we can stay there. Um, but yeah, it's not usually something that you stay through when you're summiting. So what we did is we went from base camp to Camp 1, and we left early in the morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning. And again, we did so to try to avoid any changes from the weather and in terms of like heat and sun and those kind of things, because again, it's pretty dangerous going through the day. So we got to Camp 1, sometime around 10 o'clock in the morning. It took about 8 hours or so. And then from there, we went directly to Camp 2. So we did stop for a minute just to get some tea and let anybody use the restroom or those kind of things, which is kind of a loose term. And yeah, and then we moved on to Camp 2. Now, Camp 2 is a bit bigger. And from that area, it's the last place that helicopters can fly in and out of, typically just due to elevation. But it also then provides a reserve for extra oxygen tanks, food, supplies, those kind of things. So the camp is a bit bigger, and that's why we end up staying there. We stayed there 2 nights. That is about 22,500 feet. And we did so at this point still without oxygen. So we slept there 2 nights without oxygen. On the rotation, we did about 3 nights without oxygen. And so again, your body really has to be acclimated to that sense. Just thinking about, the fact that there's no place in the United States that's even that high, even in Alaska. So it's quite high. And again, some people, if they go up too fast or they're not keeping hydration a priority, you can really start to get quite sick from the altitude. Once we stayed the second night, we woke up the next morning pretty early in the morning. And as you go through most of Camp 1 to then about halfway to Camp 3, you're passing a glacier field. And so in the back, you can kind of see from the picture here that as you start to get higher and higher, it opens up, but then you're just passing these large crevasses. And that's also fairly dangerous as you go through it, especially as we were coming down, because it was kind of a whiteout as we were coming down. And so you can't see very far in front of you. So you have to be very careful about where you're stepping, because there are areas where it'll just break and you'll fall through. When you get to about halfway to Camp 3, you get to the section where you start to use what is known as a Jumar or an ascender. And it's a handheld device which you slide up the rope and it locks so that it doesn't come back down, but that clicks to your harness, and you will then slide this up using then an ice axe or something like that, or um, some kind of pole or mountaineering pole to climb up. Because from that point, you start to hit an ice shelf. And during the rotations, there wasn't enough snow, so there was actually quite a bit of rockfall. So we didn't end up getting through to that point during the rotation as we were acclimating. And actually, one of the rocks fell and hit somebody in the shoulder and separated their shoulder. So we decided to come back down. And just due to the fact that the winds were 70 miles an hour and blowing down our tents. Um, so yeah, so that's really when things start to get even more serious in terms of the physicality of the climb, because at that point, from halfway to Camp 3 all the way to summit and then back down, you're looking at about 45 to 60-degree angles of climbing the entire way. No breaks on that part. So we finished the climb and we got to Camp 3. And once you get to this section, then you start to put on oxygen tanks, and even a little bit before, because at this point you're about 25,000 feet of elevation. So it's, again, very significant. Now, Camp 3 is one of those camps where it's actually quite dangerous in terms of where it's located, because, again, it's on the top of an ice shelf. And the angle, as I mentioned, is quite steep. So there might be some flat sections of where the camps are set up, the tents themselves. But most people are recommended not to get out of their tent. So, of course, you use the bottles to pee in, these kind of things, and stay inside your tent. And if you're moving outside of it, usually you want to be clipped into some kind of rope or harness at that point. There was a gentleman, unfortunately, that got up in the middle of the night, not realizing, again, I think probably due to the elevation, what he was doing. Not in our crew, but in the Japanese crew. And he slipped off the mountain, and that was the end of that. And so, again, it's taken quite seriously as to, the suggestions from the Sherpas to not do certain things or do certain things. And certainly by me, I wanted to make sure I came back home. So yeah, so it's quite intense, but it's also quite gorgeous as you go through it, and you get to see the sunset over the ridge and the valley behind me, and yeah, it's quite an experience. You are on oxygen, like I said, at that point too, so it does start to change your perspective a bit on everything that's going on, and you move slowly, but the oxygen does help. It's not like a superpower where it kind of adds an adrenaline rush, but it does give you enough energy to be able to sleep, and you sleep a little bit better actually than even at Camp 2, at least the first night, and you're able to then start making your way up. So we got up the next morning and got up at about 7:30. So at this point, we've gone from base camp to Camp 2, which is one day, and then we stayed another day, so second day, and now we're at Camp 3, and then getting up from Camp 3 and going to Camp 4. So we're on, third day going into the fourth day here. So getting from Camp 3 to Camp 4 was probably one of the hardest parts, in my opinion, of the trip. That's when people start to have a queue, because, again, you're going on one rope up and down. And so people that have summited the day before are going to be starting to pass you on the way up, coming back down, and vice versa. And it does get a bit dangerous as you're doing that, because you have to start unclipping and then clipping around people as you're moving up. And again, if you let go, you're falling off the mountain at that point. So it's pretty intense. And again, you're also on oxygen. And so that morning that we left, again, like I said, we left at 7:30. It was the last time I had a proper meal. I had some oatmeal and a little protein powder that I put in there, and filled up our water from boiling some of the snow. And we took off. I did not get to Camp 4 until 8:30 at night, that night. And as we were going through, there was a large storm that was coming in. And Camp 4 is when you start to get into what is known as the death zone, where your body is actually deteriorating on a cellular level because of the altitude. You're at about 27,000 feet. And at that point, you have a number of different tents set out on this flat area before you start hitting the ridge again. So it is a little bit safer in terms of where you're sleeping, just in terms of geography, but you are very exposed. And as the storm was coming in, usually you're sharing tents anywhere from 3 to 4 people, maybe even 5 people in a tent. And these are smaller tents. You're just kind of packed in and you're resting until you're about to make your summit push. But for me, because we were waiting for some of the people to make our way up, and we couldn't really pass too many people in the queue just due to the lines. It took us a little bit longer, my Sherpa and myself. So when we got up there wasn't actually a tent. And so what we did is I sat on a rock, freezing for about an hour, while he ran around and tried to talk with some of the other crews to see if we could get in for a bit just to rest and warm up and make some more water. And so that took about an hour. And so finally, about 9:30 at night, we ended up finding a tent from another crew, and we were able to spend some time there. At which point, my Sherpa informed me that the rest of the team, my team that I was with, the Elite Exped team, would be leaving in about an hour to go summit. And so literally I had gone 13 hours with the one meal that I had, 1 liter of water, and I was completely exhausted. And then found out that I had maybe about an hour to rest before we then pushed for the summit and then had to come all the way back down. So there was a point in the conversation where we started to debate, do we, is this something I can do? Is this something physically that I can do? Knowing that I've essentially exerted everything that I have in me, at least to what I thought. And the options weren't great, right? They were, okay, lay there for an hour, get some more water, and make another potentially 12-hour push up, and then 4 hours back down without any food. We didn't have a meal that night either. I had an RX bar and a beef stick for dinner. But the alternative to leaving was then to potentially stay another night at Camp 4. And our crew, Nims, who leads the crew, and several others, again, in the beginning, and also me knowing this and doing research on it, it was recommended that we don't do that. Because unfortunately, even with oxygen, what happens at Camp 4 is that your heart rate slows down so much when you're sleeping that a lot of people don't wake back up. And so again, it's why they call it the death zone. It's really quite dangerous. So those were my options. And I sat there, for a while, just kind of contemplating it in my head. And I promised my wife and my children that I wasn't going to stay at Camp 4. I wasn't going to sleep there. And so I realized, hey, this is what you've been training for about a year. And I kept saying, hey, once you get started, you're reaching the summit. Like, that's the goal, right? And so the adrenaline's going to kick in. You're going to have a second wind. I know it. And so that's what I decided. And I said, let's do it. So we laid there, like I said, for an hour while the wind was blowing hard, and woke up at about 10:30, or got up at about 10:30. Didn't really sleep. And refilled the water with another liter, started packing up our gear. And I have to say, I prayed a lot that night. I prayed a lot that day as we were leaving, just to, have any energy, any support, the strength to kind of make it through. And I'm thinking about it now. I mean, that day was probably the best day that I had out of any of them in terms of both energy and the experience. And I really think a lot of that was due to the mindset, right? I knew that I was doing what I was wanting to do. Like the goal was coming to fruition and I could see it. I could feel it. And I knew I was going to be there at the summit. And so it just really changed my perspective on everything. And I just started to smile and feel a lot of gratitude um, for what was going on. And I also then started to pass quite a few people too. And as I was passing these people, it was interesting to see um, to the point that it was shared, a lot of people started to fall apart at that altitude. And again, you're moving from 27,000 feet to 29,000 feet, where people are not supposed to be, where airplanes potentially fly. um, and people were throwing up, people were losing consciousness, people were, you know, losing their ability to keep moving. And the particular day that we had picked, um, both day before and after were great weather windows. So we had a couple of days of good weather. But our particular day, Nims, the guy that leads our crew, um, had us move from the 19th to the 20th. And at first, we were all kind of frustrated about that experience because we'd been waiting and waiting and waiting and sitting at base camp just itching to leave and to do this. But we also realized very quickly why he chose that day. And we were super grateful for his knowledge and his experience and trusted in that, because the day prior, there were 57 people that were moving up to summit. The day that we did it, there were 37. So there was almost half, of the amount of people moving up, which is important, especially in these last parts, because that's where, like I said, people start to get sick. People sit down and they freeze to death. And so you really want to try to avoid the queues as much as possible. And our day in the morning, as we're going up, again, we left in the middle of the night with headlamps, but by 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, the sun started rising. And it was one of the most remarkable viewpoints I've ever seen in my life. It was just fantastic. And so we then made it up to summit at about 10:30 in the morning the next day. So again, it took about 12 hours. Now on the way up, my Sherpa and I, right above us, about 50 yards, noticed another gentleman who was struggling to put on his gloves. And he was like pawing at his hands and trying to say something to us, but it was incoherent and really just didn't understand what he was saying. And he then dropped one of his gloves, which I tried to run out on the line and grab. But unfortunately, the wind took it and blew it away. And we got up to him and he wasn't even strapped in. We'd found out that his oxygen mask broke on the way up. And so he was continuing to try to push towards the summit without oxygen and didn't really have the acclimation or the experience to do so. And so he was struggling quite a bit. And so I got up to him and helped him start strapping in his harness back to the rope and getting his backpack on him, while my Sherpa then went down to three others in our crew that happened to have extra gear, because we as a team bring extra gear and valves and these kind of things. And it is common for the tanks and the masks to freeze. Actually, mine, I kept having to, kind of snap a bit to pop the ice off of. Even my jacket, which is meant for this, the zippers freeze solid. And even with heat packs inside of me that I put in my pockets to kind of keep them warm. So we'd have to continuously press on the jackets to crack the ice, move the masks around, but people sometimes forget that. And then they freeze up and then they stop functioning. So we helped carry him to summit, and then he followed us back down. And because of that, I ended up spending about 45 minutes at the summit, which is twice as long as most people do. Usually it's about 15 to 20 minutes, but I had caught up to most of the team at that point. The viewpoint at the top of the world was pretty spectacular. It was a bit overcast, which to some degree was great because it keeps the heat in from where you're at with the altitude, but it's not so cold where the wind's blowing and all that kind of stuff. So we were pretty fortunate that day. There was a point for about an hour where the wind started picking up quite a bit after we reached the south summit, which is the first summit that you hit, and then there's about another hour and a half left to get to the final summit. And so there, it did start to worry me a bit that maybe we would get close and then the wind would pick up too hard and not be able to summit, because a crew that was coming down as we were going up from 2 to 3, we actually passed about 30 to 40 people that were coming down and just so discouraged because they had made it about 250 meters to the summit and the winds had picked up so heavy that they couldn't move any further and had to come back down. So I was very grateful to, again, just have the perfect weather window, have a smaller amount of crew that was with us, and to be able to have the ability, the physicality, the mental strength to push through even with zero sleep for essentially 2 days at that point. So after we had summited, like I said, we had helped carry this gentleman and start moving him back down. And he was up there actually celebrating his father's life, who had been a Sherpa, and had his picture of them. And at this point then too, we got to celebrate, share the flag of Hazelden up there, do a couple of videos. And it was just kind of remarkable. I have to admit, it was slightly anticlimactic. Just so much going on. And I think the Sherpa also kind of was distracting a bit too from everything, the fact that we were on the top of the world. And it really didn't hit me until a couple of days after I'd gotten home that I had summited Mount Everest. It was just kind of crazy. But yeah, so we reached summit at about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then started making our way back. And like I said, this is where it started getting really hard, not just for me, but for everybody. The truth is that on the way up, as you hear the stories, you do pass people that have been there and frozen to the mountain for a long time. And so you try not to think about that stuff as you go up. You try to just kind of stay positive and direct yourself towards other things as a focal point. But on the way down, as you're getting tired and the wind's blowing, you start to notice it more and more. And it starts to really make you reflect on, okay, I need to get back down to safety. I had learned from the other mountains what is called a Sherpa rappel. And it is a rappelling, manner that you use your carabiners to twist and tie through the rope, and you go front down. The advantage of that is that it is very quick. The disadvantage of that is that it is slightly more technical and requires physical strength to do it, because if you start to get tired and you let go, you will then fall face first down the mountain until the next point, which could be 50 meters, 100 meters, and you'll be hitting people on the way down. I had enough energy to do it, and I had the motivation to get back down. Again, being a little bit nervous and cautious about everything that I was seeing, really kind of kept the motivation going. So on the way down, I started to then pass quite a few people, and I made it down quite quickly. I got down at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and some people couldn't walk anymore. They were being slid down by the ropes. They were sliding down on their butts. People were trying to regular rappel, which, kind of lean back and start walking down. And it's certainly a safe thing to do. It just takes a really long time. And it requires that nobody else is on the rope. Because when you're rappelling, you need a little bit of slack, a little bit of tension, so that you can actually detach yourself from the mountain and lean back. But the thing is that everybody's sharing these ropes. And so they're pulling on them, and they are sometimes very close to the ground with zero tension left. And so then people would have to wait their turn to be able to do that. And so that's why people start to fall apart on the top of the mountain. And I saw it as people came down. And like I said, there were more than half of our crew that got helicoptered out. I was only one of 5 to walk from summit all the way back down to base camp, which that is the actual summit in terms of Nepal's certifications that they will send you, is from walking from base camp to summit to base camp. But yeah, so we ended up making it back down to camp 3 after camp 4. We rested at camp 4 for just a bit. Again, I ate another RX bar, and at this point I had been up, since 7:30 in the morning the previous day. So almost 36 hours at this point, and then trying to push back down. We rested there just for a bit, just to get some more water, and start making our way down. I had to thaw out the RX bar because it was frozen solid. And yeah, we finally got down to camp 3 at about 11:30 at night. And at this point, I am so toasted. I am so exhausted. There's literally nothing in me. And I started to slip on some of the sections, as I was mentioning, with that rappelling. And I actually slid on one of them about 30 or 40 yards until I finally caught myself on the rope. And that was pretty close to when we got to camp 3. And at that point, we decided it's not really safe to continue going. And so we rested there for the evening. We slept at about half the section of oxygen. So there's up to 4, and they go by 0.5. So we slept on the 0.5 just to keep the heart rate going, and also to save oxygen, because I also only had about 30% at this point too. So again, no meal for dinner. I split an apple. Another Sherpa happened to hand us an apple and one of those like little mini Cokes, which for whatever reason doesn't freeze on the mountain. And we split that with my Sherpa so that he could eat as well. And we rested there from about midnight until about 5:30 in the morning, when we got up, or 5 o'clock in the morning. And then we started packing our stuff up. But my face was completely dehydrated and bleeding. My lungs were super dry and hard to swallow. And I had at that point, when I finally got back down from 4, I had about a third left of my water bottle. So I took a slight, section of the Alani New pack that I had left. I only had like a little bit left. Poured a little energy drink into the water. Found another RX bar in my backpack, put that in my pocket to thaw, and we made our way back down to camp 2, in which we got there around 11 o'clock in the morning. And that was the first time where I finally got a meal. I had some fried rice and an egg, and actually a Fanta, which was fantastic at the point. So I ended up staying there for a few hours. And that's, again, when people, you start to see people flying out from helicopters. And people, I'd pass and they didn't even know who I was, and they were in our group, asking for water, asking for rations. And unfortunately, we didn't have anything else to share. And really, that was kind of the only thing I was thinking about too. I just kept saying that over and over again in my head. I just kept saying water. But yeah, so then eventually we got back down and made our way through camp 1 again, and then all the way back to base camp, which I got at about 12:30 in the morning. And then finally had another meal at about 2:30 in the morning. So woke up the next day, had a bit of a fever just from coming down really quickly. And so then was able to get on a helicopter a little bit faster than maybe some of the others, with part of our crew that had made it first, and flew out to Kathmandu that next morning. So I was back in Kathmandu by the 22nd. And man, it was quite amazing just to have a bottle of water, have a hot shower, have my laundry done, sleep in a warm bed, have a nice meal, all these things you take for granted. So, yeah, again, I know we're getting closer to time, so I want to start wrapping this up so we can do a little bit of Q&A. For anybody that has any questions, you can feel free to use the chat to drop in anything like that. But again, I really appreciate you guys listening to the experience. And yeah, just super grateful to be home. Flew home 2 days later. It took about 36 hours to fly home. It's quite a long trip. But yeah, so.
Awesome. Ryan, really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. And personally, very grateful that you made it back and are here to share that story. It's quite incredible. We do have a couple questions coming in. The first thing that I wanted to note, we do have a special video for those of you on this call. There are 3 links behind me. If you'd like to get involved with Let's Fuel Growth, if you would like to get involved and support Hazelden Betty Ford, or if you need support for yourself or a loved one, these 3 QR codes, I will share that with you at the end of the call as well. That is how we can get involved. The first question, Ryan, coming in, let's see here. So how would you compare this experience of climbing Mount Everest with your recovery experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you guys asked that, because that's where I really wanted to tie that in. And having Adam and Hazelden Betty Ford on here as well, and just the support from that group has been amazing. It's definitely one of the places that helped me significantly in just kind of getting to this place. But I think that, really what I was trying to accomplish with this trip, outside of course, summiting Everest and coming back safely, was really to continue to inspire people to know that, hey, I at one point lived out of my car and cheap motels and really had nothing that I could aspire to. And once I got sober, I still had really little clue as to what I was going to do with my life. But I knew that I wanted to live. I wanted to continue living. And so as you go through these kind of journeys, being out in the mountains, for me personally, really brings a lot of sense of peace. I mean, it is certainly challenging, right? And I don't necessarily recommend doing Everest itself. But there is something very simple about that process, and it allows you to kind of slow down and think about everything that's going on. I really had a lot of gratitude, and I was praying every day, just to be alive and to be grateful for everything that was going on, and to really try to experience it even in the hard parts, knowing that it was just a moment in time. And I think that's, again, the metaphor that I'm trying to share with everybody, is that even these hard parts in life, when you think that you can't walk through them, you can't get through them yourselves, just know that it's really just a brief moment in time, right? And if you allow yourself the opportunity to just experience that, even in the struggle, and you reach out to other people, myself, Lex, Adam, Hazelden, other people in the community, you'll find that you're not alone. And there is hope for anything that you're struggling with. And everybody has a mountain that they're trying to climb. And once they climb that mountain, there's something else that comes in their life. It's how life works. It's filled with adversity, but it also is why life is so beautiful. And it's why I continue to stay here on this planet as long as I can, because I'm always eager to find out what's going to happen out tomorrow. And I don't know. I don't know what God's plan is for me, but as long as I'm doing the right thing and I'm connecting with the right people, and I'm keeping my feet moving, it's all going to unfold, and it's going to be amazing, even if I didn't plan it. Right. So hopefully you guys can feel that same way. Hopefully you guys can pass that on to other people that are struggling, your kids, your families, whatever it might be, and just share with them that, like, anything is possible, even climbing Mount Everest. So
I love it. The next question is a great question from Jeremiah. Given the focused intensity of the experience, what is it like adjusting to the normality of everyday life again?
I appreciate that one. So I have to admit it. The last trip I was on, I kind of knew the experience from that. And so bless my wife's heart, I came home the last trip and literally got off a plane, took a shower, put on a tuxedo, and went to a black tie event. and was like standing, sleeping. And it was not the best experience for me. And so I kind of told her, I said, hey, look it, I love you very much. And I know you want me home and I'm safe, but I can't go to any black tie events when we get home, at least not for a couple of days. Um, and so I got to sleep a little bit in Kathmandu, just 2 days. I could have stayed a little bit longer, but it was my mom's birthday and a few other things. So I wanted to try to get home for that. But yeah, I think I tried to allow myself a little bit more time. And my wife has certainly been super gracious with all of this and huge supporter. And everybody just kind of gave me a few days, but it has been definitely different going from having everything kind of mapped out and having one focus to then going back to kids' schedules and work schedules and friends and family and all these things. And of course, I want to be there and experience it. But I'm also trying to absorb all of the emotions and everything that's come in from this experience too, and really try to make sure I hold on to it. So it's getting better every day. And the more I talk about it, the easier it is too. I have to admit, the first couple of days I had nightmares when I came home, truthfully. And I was told that that's actually a common thing that happens when you see what you see and you go through what you go through. It's a traumatic experience. But again, it just makes me grateful for everybody that was praying and supporting and following along, because it made me feel like I wasn't doing this by myself. So
Wonderful. I know we're over time, but I think we can take this to the top of the hour. We have a few more questions that have come in from Lori. Would you do it again?
um, that's a hard question, right? I thought about that myself. Because I have summited, probably not. If I didn't summit, like some of the other people that we passed, that one might be harder to say no. It might be like, well, it's still there. It's still on my mind. I think in the end, whether or not I summited, I realized this as I was going through the experience. The goal was to summit, right? To show the success of that, to show people that it can be done. But I also wanted to not make that such a focal point where people miss the message, right? It's not about conquering every mountain that comes in your way. And some mountains you won't summit, some mountains you won't get through the way that you think that you'll get through them. But the point is about how you show up, right? And how you experience that, and the message then that you bring for people moving forward. And so whether or not I summited wasn't going to be a determinant of whether or not the trip was a success as in and of itself. So I think those are two things that I've kind of realized and made distinguishing emotions and connections with in a positive way. I'm super grateful that I did summit. There are less than 780 Americans that I've known, researched in the history of Everest to summit. There's less than like 8,000 people in the world to do it. And in Minnesota itself, I think I'm maybe the second or third to do it. I found one other person. So, I mean, it's quite a remarkable experience. And I think that there's definitely going to be some other adventures for me. But I think also, too, just being mindful of the fact that I have a family, I have a commitment, I have other people in my life that are relying on me and dependent on me, that that I have, I have to make decisions that aren't always life threatening. So,
Yeah, great answer. Question from D. What's an unexpected skill you learned along the way that you will pass to someone else making the journey in the future?
sure. So, two things that are very important in high altitude mountaineering. Uh, Something very simple, but always close what you open immediately. I know that sounds like a silly thing, but like even as simple as taking out a chapstick from like a zipper, zip up the zipper on your backpack, use the chapstick, unzip, put it back. Because so many people, what I found is they're going up, right? And they unzip something and they grab a heat pack or a bar or whatever it is, and they totally, because of the altitude, forget what they're doing. And they set their backpack down, and then all of their gear dumps out and falls down the mountain. I saw it many times. You don't get it back. And that stuff at this point, like, you bring just what you need. So if you lose just what you need, you have to go back home, like, or pray that somebody else has something like that. So again, one of the things that I learned, it doesn't matter what it is. Don't wait until you're done using it to zip the zipper up. Like, open, close it, open, close it. Just get in the habit of doing that, and do it at base camp. Do it early on, because then you build that habit in. The second thing is, really great things in life take patience. And this trip is totally opposite from a lot of the experiences that you have and you train. And I train for a lot of high intensity. I train with masks, all that stuff. But this is also a very slow process. And you have to be very comfortable being uncomfortable in that circumstance, right? You're sleeping in the cold. You're, eating less than you should be, and you're losing weight. You're malnourished, you're dehydrated, all of these things, and you're uncomfortable. I mean, there was one time I was trying to go to the bathroom, number 2, in a windstorm while the tent's flowing away, and there's like poop on one of the sides of the tent, and it's like waving on, like, you have to be uncomfortable being in those kind of circumstances. I'm serious. Like, I have these crazy poop stories on these trips. I don't know why, but anyway, I'm just saying, like, in these trips, just get really ready for that kind of experience and try not to get overwhelmed with it, right? I meditated a lot. I read a lot of books that were motivational. I tried as best as I could to talk to my family and connect with them in meaningful ways. And then I tried to connect with other people that were on the trip and really just slow down, enjoy that process, because there's very limited opportunities, at least in my life, that I get to like slow down like that. It doesn't happen very often. Everybody's life is super busy these days. So enjoy that process. Yeah, those are the 2 things I guess I would leave you with.
Great. I do want to be cautious of time. Last question. If you could have a conversation with 18-year-old Ryan, what would you say to him?
It's a good question. First off, I'd probably give him a hug. This one might make me tear up a bit. To this day, I would never think that I would be a person that had summited Everest. To have a family of 4 children and a beautiful wife and a home, a job, friends, people on a video call that actually want to listen to me, not spit a bunch of BS to you, and genuinely are engaged in my life. There's so many blessings in my life that I never would have ever imagined happening. And so, like I continue to tell myself today, like I did on the mountain, I'd say don't give up. Don't ever give up. No matter how hard it seems, there's always a reason to keep going. So, yeah.
Love it. Love it. Well, we just have a few minutes left. Great question came in from Jennifer. You're amazing. Will you share pictures?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we can do too, I know we're only like 2 minutes out, so I do have some pictures that we can send out on my Instagram as well. And Lex, maybe you can drop that into the chat. I have several stories from the Everest project, and it kind of documents everything going out. But I will be sending a lot of pictures and videos. And then, as Lex mentioned, we also created a video, and we tested it out, but actually the audio wasn't working well. The video worked well, but the audio wasn't working well. So we didn't want to ruin the experience for you guys. So we're going to send that to you afterwards. But yeah, I can definitely make sure that in that email, we can also send some links to other videos and imagery as well, for sure.
Perfect. Again, if you or a loved one need help, hazeldenbettyford.org. is a great resource and near and dear to my heart personally. They also, a donation of $5 or more gets you access to that teaser video. That's also a way to show support. Thank you, Adam, and the Hazelden Betty Ford team for being involved. And if you'd like to stay up to date on Let's Fuel Growth initiatives and how you can get involved locally or nationally, letsfuelgrowth.org is a great resource. Ryan, I will turn it over to you to wrap this.
Yeah. Well, again, I just want to thank everybody for joining today. Thank you again for joining the journey. It was wonderful to be able to share that with you and then share this experience with you as well. And then, Adam, thank you again for you and for Hazelden and all the support that you guys have given to us. You guys have been fantastic and just a great resource. And one of the things that I'm proud of saying is that I have the relationship with you and that I went through your doors when I was 19, and I'm still here to talk about it and very grateful for it. So, yeah, and thank you, Lex, again for helping set in all of this as well. Yeah, and please feel free to reach out. I know that we're at time, but on my Instagram, on Facebook, feel free to DM me, send me messages if you have questions about mental health, if you have questions about recovery, whether it's you or a loved one. We can have a lot of confidential conversations. I've done it with many families, and between Lex and I, we've helped thousands of families over the last decade. Really just kind of find the right resources and the support. And we will be doing other events in the future as part of Let's Fuel Growth, one of which might be a trip out to base camp. So I will keep you guys posted and updated on all that stuff as we get through it. But yeah, just keep following along. And again, super grateful for everybody. Thank you so much.